All right, so good lesson in real property reports on this one. So we know the real property report, you must have compliance in order for it to be a legal contract. It's right in the purchase offer. It says right in there that you will supply a real property report with compliance, and that all the land, all the buildings and improvements on the land will be within regs. Lots of times, like I would say 70% of the time, real property reports there's an issue with. And what generally happens, this is the general rule of thumb, is that the seller's lawyer will hold back funds from the proceeds from the seller, and they'll go into a trust account for a period of time until that RPR is updated and given to the buyer if it's not ready on possession day. And then they take possession with a holdback is typically what happens. But in contract law, usually $5,000-ish. But in contract law, it is the seller that is technically in breach of contract. And technically, a buyer can walk away from the deal with no repercussions at that point, right? Like think that through, okay? Seller's in breach. So, morning of possession, I get a text from the buying realtor. Buyers can't close today. They don't have the funds. We need a 2-week extension. This is on the day of closing. And I'm like, well, you know that we don't have to do that. We can just take the deposit and go. Well, not so fast. A couple hours later, get a call from the lawyer, and he's like, well, problem is the RPR isn't compliant. And the RPR had been sent in, we've been waiting for compliance. We knew that there was going to be an issue with it, but even the city hadn't gone back to us with what the issues were. So there was a chance that it would come back stamped on the Friday, but it didn't. So here we are with a buyer that wants to, it's a builder buyer that wants to close, but in a builder's best interest, if they're going to knock a house down or renovate a house, they don't want the carrying costs while they're getting their development permits in place and while getting all their permits in place. So now it's in the buyer's best interest to not close, and they have that option to not close. They needed an extension anyways, so it all lined up perfectly for the buyer that now the lawyers have decided that, well, we're just not going to close until we get a stamped RPR. Got a note back from the city that it's going to take 2 or more months to get compliance because there's a relaxation, not an encroachment agreement, a relaxation that has to happen because this house was built in the 60s or 50s or whenever it was, and there's a concrete retaining wall that was built on the property back then that didn't matter. Now it's way out into the back alley. So you get a relaxation, because if you take it off, then now you're reducing the price because it's not the same property and you're paying for something that isn't there. So 2+ months. I don't think that's the best solution. I think that there's got to be a solution somewhere, but in a situation like this where the buyer, they're exercising their right. They have every right to do this. And it's all because the RPR was not updated in time. And there's not much we could have done because we ordered the RPR, we had them order the RPR when they were ready to list, but it's a matter of you call somebody, you want them to list your house, you get it ready in a week, then it's on the market and it sells right away. I mean, that window is 2 to 3 weeks. You're not getting an RPR in 3 weeks. You just aren't. And I mean, a lot of people are now asking you to accept RPRs as is. We're doing that on a couple of listings for a reason. We're doing that. It's up front. You got to be willing to do it. But you would have to cross off all of that RPR information in the purchase contract to make that valid. Lesson here. Take this story, tell it to your sellers, okay? Say, hey, look, if you don't have an updated RPR, and it's always best practice to get them to get an updated RPR. I don't like dealing with title insurance. I don't like dealing with RPRs as is. That muddies up the waters. It creates animosity between a seller and a buyer. Cleanest thing to do, just get an updated RPR. Just get it done. And get it done fast, right? Okay? Now, if you do not, here's the way around this. If you do not have an RPR by the time they are about to waive conditions, or if you have an RPR on order, you can write in a term on the purchase contract that the purchaser will take possession of the property with a holdback of $5,000 if a compliant RPR is not provided by possession day until that RPR is provided, right? We'll reword it somehow, but that's technically what you would need to do to protect your seller's ass so that that possession happens. Now I've got a seller that's upset because the RPR didn't come back, which is not, there's nothing we can do about it, right? It's not on us. It's just a matter of there's something wrong with the property that we didn't know about. We had no idea. Help them over to the RPR in time. Like everything was done in time. Lesson. There's always an out, right? We want to avoid the outs. This one we couldn't avoid, and it just so happens it worked out for the buyer.